So you're still here?
I'm still here.
Let's see, should I get the sign behind me?
Yeah, that's
or
a good
should
idea.
Or should I just flip my phone over so it doesn't show me at all?
You could do that. That's cool.
How about that for an opener?
Very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, maybe also just like a little peek at who you are, Jeff, if you don't mind, just so we have like that brief intro. But then I think we should be good after that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Maybe, okay. Yeah, great, perfect. So should we just go ahead?
Sure, I'm set. Jamie, you all set?
Yep, I'm set.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is Jeff Haddorff coming to you live from the Northeast Sculpture Gallery Factory in beautiful Northeast Minneapolis. And I am here with Professor Kim Rhodes, who is a professor of the humanities, or cut, start, flip. What do you do again, Kim? I had that before, right?
Before.
Professor, wait, she teaches.
I think
I had it right before.
Wanted to say, we were going to say
Professor of
endowed chair of the humanities and professor of art history. Is that what you're
okay? All right. Take two.
We could also, Kim, if you also just want to introduce yourself too, I think that
no way, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
Jeff really wants to do it.
I can do this. I can do this. Okay.
Take two.
Hi, this is Jeff Haddorff. I'm coming to you from the Northeast Sculpture Gallery Factory in beautiful Northeast Minneapolis, and I'm here with Kimberly Rhodes, who has an and is a professor of art history at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey.
That, you know, like you just did, your show is up until May 1st, but also, are we stopping?
I guess we had an issue.
We had an issue. Okay. Okay.
Where should I restart? Like the whole thing? Oh God, I did it so well that time. Okay, that's okay. All right, I guess we're gonna start over.
Are we glitching on your end or my end? I don't
know.
My connection okay?
I think it was too unstable up there.
Oh yeah. All right. I think it was the issue was Jamie was outside because of she thought it would be an echoey thing with her in here, but I think with her headphones on, it should be okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just gonna start
third time's
from the top again. Oh my God, we didn't have the hairstylist come in.
Did you get your haircut?
No, I just haven't bathed.
It's just sticking up, so you can't.
It's just sticking up.
It's going in a different direction.
Conan O'Brien thing
going
I've
in
got
a
going
different
on right now.
direction than usual.
Exactly. Oh boy. All right.
Third time is the charm.
Third time is the charm. And here we go. Welcome to the Northeast Sculpture Gallery Factory. My name is Jeff Haddorff, and I am here with Kimberly Rhodes, who is an endowed chair in the humanities at Drew University and also an art historian. And we are here to go through my show mantra, way through Saturday to 5 in Northeast Minneapolis. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, Jeff. I'm happy to be here today to talk with you about your show. I'd also like to tell everybody that just before this show, Mantra, opened, you were featured in a show at the Corn Gallery at Drew University called The Stuff the World is Made of. And the other folks in the show with you were Martha Klippinger, Valerie Hegarty, and Leah Wolf. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you about this work that you're showing in your hometown of Minneapolis today. So if you're ready, I'm happy to get started.
I think that sounds good.
Okay. All right, cool. So when I think about your work, one of the words that comes to mind very readily is the word gestural. And it's kind of counterintuitive because it's not a word we usually use to talk about sculpture. It's usually a word we use to talk about a particular kind of painting and drawing. That includes kind of very heavy mark making, very broad strokes of paint. But I like that term in reference to your work. And I'm not trying to categorize your work in any way. In a lot of ways, I hope we can talk about how your work kind of defies categorization in some ways and moves against categorization. I hope we can come back to that. So I'm not trying to categorize your work in this particular realm of the gestural. But I like the way that that word conjures the body and interaction of the artist with materials in a very visceral way. I like the way that it brings up mark making in a very particular way. And I really like the way that it nods to the idea of nonverbal communication, of being able to communicate kind of with the body, with movement. And if all that resonates with you, which I hope it does, I wonder if you can talk about that and talk about it as it maybe relates to your practice, how you make your things, what your process is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, your reference to the body is very apt. I know many of the things, particularly the things in this show, are all sort of human scale or slightly larger, and that is a size that I work in a lot. And I think, along with that, one of the things that go with the gestural quality is just the physicality of working with clay at this scale. It's heavy and it's fragile and it's difficult to work with. It takes a lot of physical effort to build things in clay at this size, and I think that effort is something that's described within the word. And I so the gesture just sort of comes out of the physicality of the process in a lot of ways.
Can you talk a little bit about the initial stages of your process and the particular marks that you make,
Sure.
create kind of on the clay before you start to hand build with it?
For sure. Yeah. So the textural surface of the pieces is really just taken off the floor of my studio. There's a concrete floor that's sort of begun to degrade, and I am certainly pushing that degradation farther with my work with that. But I take 25-pound chunks of clay and I throw it out across that degraded concrete space on the floor, and just pull it up and throw it down again until it's basically the dimensions and the thickness that I'm looking for that piece. And then I leave those slabs out usually overnight to firm up a bit, so that they're able to stand up on their own, but still have malleability, and I can still join pieces together with relative ease. And so that's typically how the process begins. And then as far as the shapes themselves, it's really sort of evolved over the last 6 years or so, whereas I used to draw basically architectural drawings of each piece, and I would do sort of plans and elevations of each separate piece in the sculpture. And so it was all sort of I was just carrying out the drawings that I had made earlier. And then about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I decided just to stop doing that and to be more intuitive in the process, which, I mean, it's not a, you know, working in large scale ceramics isn't an area that necessarily lends itself well to that sort of way of working, because, you know, it's all got to hold its own weight when it gets up.
Right.
So usually you
Right.
have to be planful about that. But I, at some point, just decided not to do that and to see where it went. So I'll typically draw a plan for the bottom of the shape, and then I'll start building from there, and then I'll build a top to, so like for this piece, you know, so each of these are a section, right? So I do the bottom, and then I build it up and do the top, and then, you know, use the top of that piece to sort of work on the next piece and kind of go up from there with a sort of general idea of, you know, I kind of want it to move like this, or I want it to move up and split out and see what happens at that point. And yeah, and it just kind of leads to where it leads. And I think it's a much, for me, it's more interesting and more exciting to not know where the piece is going right from the start, to have a sort of general idea. And then, you know, and of course the clay sort of has its own idea of what it wants to do and what it will let me do. And so there is that sort of dialogue with the material that plays into the forms as well.
There's so many things you've said I want to pick up on. I'm going to choose just a couple.
Okay.
First is that I think in the red piece you were just showing us. I mean, I think people can look at that piece maybe as a way to see kind of those slabs that you throw out on the stacked up on top, right? So that's a piece that kind of encompasses in a lot of ways all parts of your process. You know, being able to see that initial stage of throwing out the slab, but in that case you didn't shape it, you just left it and fired it. And then to be able to see the kind of worked hand-built pieces below. So I think that's pretty cool that it encompasses kind of both parts of your process for people to see and think about how those two relate to one another, amongst many other things that piece does. The other thing is that captured my attention is the way you were talking about your process and making elevations and using really architectural terms to talk about those initial stages of your process. And as I look around the gallery, as you're showing it to me and to all of us as we're watching this, I see columns, I see arches, I see structural elements of architecture, not just in the space, not just in the gallery space. I see columns in the space too, but in your work, you know, I'm seeing these basic structural architectural elements repeated. So there's this, but then I'm also seeing the pieces as they stand on their own, kind of in their scale, in their use of materials. I mean, and I was interestingly kind of reading something today that talked about how we don't really use terracotta as a building element anymore. It's expensive, yet, you know, if you look around at, you know, 19th century buildings, there's lots of ornamental terracotta. So, you know, your materials echo architectural materials as well from particularly a certain era. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask you is whether you can talk about all those multitude of connections to architecture that, you know, you've talked a little bit about with your process, but then about form and about structure and about buildings themselves and how they accommodate the body in different ways and accommodate scale in different ways and space.
Yeah, well, I mean, architecture is definitely something that I'm really interested in, and it is a field in which I am employed from time to time. And yeah, I mean, I think those sort of architectural forms and sort of archetypal architectural forms. I mean, the arch is, you know, this ancient sort of form that I think Egyptians were the first to use an arch, if I'm not mistaken. But throughout you know, history, those forms have been repeated, and in terms of what I'm doing, you know, I mean, I guess when I'm making things, I'm not really thinking directly about, oh, I'm going to make an architectural, you know, column, or I'm going to make an arch that references, you know, architectural history. It's just sort of part of how I'm wired to think, and how and just the shapes that are sort of meaningful and interesting to me. And so they really, I mean, they're definitely there, absolutely. But say it's like a conscious thing that I'm setting out to do. And in terms of, you know, in terms of the putting together of the pieces, I mean, it is, whenever you're building sort of a three-dimensional object in space, architecture plays a part. I mean, it has to stand up, it has to, you know, and structural engineering plays a part, right? It has to, you know, it has to stay up, it has to not fall over and crush somebody, or, you know, break or whatever. So, you know, they are, you know, of course, you're not going to sort of live in one of these sculptures, but they are architectural for sure. Yeah.
Well, I think there's also an interesting tension in your work. You were just talking about getting things need to stand up, you know, they need to not topple over, but there's a tension in your work between kind of that kind of, you know, standing up, that staying in place, and the semblance of things being very precariously balanced, which they're not. They're all very sturdy, right? They're all very secure. But there's a tension in them, which you kind of don't find that much in architecture, I don't think, of, you know, it being, which kind of brings it over into sculpture, the realm of sculpture, the realm of art, where it looks like it, you know, is very, you know, carefully balanced, right? And it has this asymmetry, and yeah.
I think the word you're looking for is janky.
Janky. I wanted you to say that. That was your cue.
Yes, I am a huge fan of the janky. I think it, yeah, that precariousness, that balance, that feeling like, oh boy, is that gonna stay up? Can I get near that? Can I touch that? Will it fall over? And yeah, it's something that I find really interesting and exciting. And it's something, yeah, that I try to let happen, right? I don't try to fix the jankiness. In fact, I try to do things that will, you know, cause it to be more janky. And clay is a great material for that, because it kind of has things that it wants to do on its own, and you either try to be heavy-handed and force it into doing exactly what you want, or you give it space to you know, have a say in what the form ends up looking like. And you know, and I think that being open to that is like a big adventure. It leads you places where you wouldn't otherwise go. And so I think part of you know, part of the building process is just being open to, okay, well, that's not what I really had in mind from the start, but I like it. I think that's, you know, I can work with that. And where do we go from there? And So I think that's part of what makes the process so exciting to me, is just that sort of adventure of it.
Can you give us an example of a piece in the gallery that happened with, or just choose one that happened with, and talk about it, if you don't mind?
There's this one, right?
It's great. That's
This one, yeah. This one was sort of an outlier, right? And this piece had gone through many iterations. There were sections below this. This used to sit up higher, and you know, it wasn't working, and I built different tops for it and whatever. And finally I sort of exploded it and made this piece its own separate piece. And you know, that used to be connected somehow, and it just sort of, I don't know, it just sort of opened up in a really interesting way. And you know, not really having two separate sort of structures as part of one sculpture was sort of different for me. I hadn't, you know, it was all very, I mean, in a way it was all very sort of vessel-like, right? I was making a vessel of some sort. And then this, you know, this one, even after it was done, it felt like an outlier, and it felt like the odd one out. And I feel like now it's one of my favorite ones. I just think, I mean, I can, you know, there's so many interesting views as you come around, and it opens up and it closes off, and it's just I'm really, yeah, for being sort of not, you know, not over the top excited about it when it was done. I feel like now it's one of my favorite ones, and one that's still really exciting for me to look at.
Yeah. And I think if you'll come to the gallery and see it, or people who know that work kind of might notice that the title of the piece is Rough Beast, and taken from a Yeats poem. And one of the famous lines in that poem is, "The center cannot hold." And I think that's true of your piece too, and you worked with that, right? And, you know, instead made it not have a center, right? Decent, and you know, created something completely different. And you know, I think that's a really interesting connection between kind of the source kind of and the title, and then what happened to the form eventually kind of with that piece.
Yeah, it really fits. I generally have a hard time with titles, but that one just seemed so perfect for it.
Yeah.
That it was really, it worked out very well. So, and also this one is particularly janky as well. Like, things just don't line up, right? It's leaning, and the bases don't match the things that are underneath them very well. And there's random sort of plates that come out. So it is, when you're talking about janky, this one is really probably the jankiest one in the show. In the best way.
Great. Also, that piece in having the, you know, separate sections of it, one kind of at a smaller scale, makes me think about the smaller pieces you have in the show, and they relate both in terms of their colors, their shapes, their texture, their scale to the larger scale work. And I know this is, you know, a more recent foray for you kind of into, you know, making and exhibiting these small pieces. So I wonder if you'd like to talk about that a little bit, including them, making them, kind of how they function kind of with the other work.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a really great point, because this, I feel like Rough Beast was sort of the mother of all these small pieces, right? Because I was never interested in making smaller pieces. And when I tried, I just couldn't, they were just terrible. They were bad. And then with this piece, there are just so many weird elements going on and so many individual sections that I really liked that I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna just use that as a springboard. So when you look at the little pieces, many of them you can see, sort of direct correlation with Rough Beast. I mean, that sort of golden brown piece is very similar to the top of Rough Beast, and this sort of shape occurs all over the place. And also the club foot from the All My Favorite Singers is just a shape that I really, I don't know, it's just there's so many interesting things going on that I've also sort of taken stabs at that in various iterations. And so, yeah, so they're really starting to sort of have a dialogue with the bigger pieces, and being able to sort of see, I don't know, it just helped me, like building Rough Beast helped me to see how I might make smaller works and how that could be exciting and interesting, and give those smaller pieces some of the stuff that makes the larger pieces interesting. And I really hadn't been able to do that before Rough Beast, and I think some of these little ones are really, really lovely. Yeah, so that was an exciting sort of spin-off from that piece, I think.
Yeah. And also, it's kind of interesting to think about them if we go back to the more, both traditional sculptural procedures and architectural procedures, right? There's an overlap in terms of the idea or the practice of using the maquette, right? Making that small scale model, which these are not small scale models, but they relate to certain elements of the larger pieces. So there's that overlap again, between sculptural procedure and architectural procedure. That is interesting to me to kind of think about. With the small pieces as well, and this happens in the large pieces, but I think with the small pieces, we also are able to really focus on your use of color and shape, and the importance of those two things, particularly shape, kind of in your artistic vocabulary, because there's kind of what I would think of as a lexicon of shapes that you use repeatedly, very inventive shapes. And I always hate to bring other artists into, specifically into the conversation, but there's this great quote that I read recently by George O'Keeffe that reminded me of that. And she said that the meaning of a word, to me, is not as exact as the meaning of a color. Colors and shapes make a more definite statement than words. And I think that quote also brings us back to the idea of the gestural and nonverbal communication, and your work being able to really engage the viewer through kind of color, shape, and these other nonverbal signals. So I don't know if you want to talk about kind of color and shape, particularly shape, which I know is important to you, and in both the small pieces and then in the larger pieces.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's an interesting relationship, right? With the the color just totally changes the meaning of the piece in a lot of ways. And sometimes, we've talked about this before, sometimes I make the piece and it's just like, oh, I know what color this is going to be. It just has to be that color, and you just do it. And other times there's more messing around, and there's a lot of layers, and there's trying different things. And And I think one of the other ways in the work has been evolved is that I feel like I used to sort of paint on the things. I used to, put color on as a painter, right? And now I feel like I'm like the sculpture itself has a color, and so that's what I'm trying to do with the color. I'm not trying to, it's not a painting process. It's sort of finding the color that is sort of integral to the shape in a way. And like I said, sometimes that's really clear, and sometimes it's more complicated. But yeah, I mean, it's, once you get it right, it's hard to imagine them being a different color. It's just like, that's just the color it is. And I think a couple of these pieces here are sort of we're at that transitional point, right? When I think Rough Beast for sure, and Mountain Station. I was still doing more sort of painting on the thing rather than sort of coloring the thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I was doing things on the sculpture on these two, whereas in the other ones, it's just that's the color the sculpture is. Which I don't know, it's sort of a weird distinction, but my thinking over that has evolved.
Yeah, you can clearly see that. I mean, in Rough Beast and Mountain Station, there are these drips and clear separations, very clear separations of color. They are very, for lack of a better term, again, to not use painting terms, but they're very painterly, right? They're very painterly. And, conform in their surfaces in many ways to what we would consider kind of gestural painting, kind of, abstract expressionist painting, sustained painting. But then the pieces, that come after that really do change in terms of the way color just feels like part of shape. And part of the organic quality of the piece. It's just very different, very different manifestations, of color.
Yeah.
And a lot of variety of color too,
Yeah. And I think, there's also, one of the many things that I think about is, I think about the pieces individually, but then I think about them as a whole too. I think about this whole sort of, there's nothing directly narrative about my work necessarily, but I do feel like, and it could be just me, because I know the narrative arc, right? I know what was going on in my life at this time. I know what I was thinking about, whatever, but I think, when I think of the last sort of 8 years, 9 years, that sort of narrative arc of, the first few of the larger pieces I started doing that had exterior steel on the structures, sort of holding them up, and to where we are now with, many of these have interior structural steel that keep them from falling over. And I'm not sure where I got off track there. Oh, but yeah, so the color, yeah. So in all of the work in this show was done in the last 2 years, and much of it, with the exception when I brought the work out to New Jersey, much of it was in the studio, fully assembled, and I was looking at it every day while I was working on the next one. And so there is a sort of color story that goes on between the pieces. If that,
Yeah. So we've managed nicely without asking the overt question to kind of talk about ceramics. And, you know, I have a couple of thoughts here, you know, that we can go with in terms of talking more about ceramics. And one of those is that is the organic quality of a lot of your forms. I mean, we've been talking about the architectural forms, but, you know, there's, you know, nature is its own architect too, right? There's, you know, there's the connection between, of course, clay kind of and the natural world, you know, nature itself. And, you know, then there's also the evocation of the organic and of natural forms in your work. And I wonder if you want to talk about that at all.
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I think there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, it's, you know, my sort of relationship with ceramics is complicated. Like, you know, I think a lot of sort of ceramics people don't relate to my work in a way that is traditionally sort of ceramic. I mean, it's important to me that they're clay. I mean, the idea of making sculpture out of earth, right, out of dirt and water is really part of the idea behind it, right? And the fact, I mean, that, you know, that the material records every time you touch it, right? Everything you touch it to is recorded on the surface, and it's recorded immediately, and it stays there. And, you know, you can choose to try to obscure that or, you know, work around that, but it's always there. And, you know, for me, that's just an exciting part about the material. And yeah, so, but it's not, I mean, you know, I don't really sort of think of myself as a ceramic artist in that way, you know. I think of myself as an artist who works with clay, and, you know, clay is a hugely technical thing to work in. I mean, there are a lot of issues that take a lot of time to figure out and to learn how to work with it. And that's, you know, that sort of craft piece of it, right? I mean, my pieces aren't crafty, right? But they couldn't be done without that knowledge of the material and how to work it and how to fire it and how to paint it. And I mean, it's all ceramic materials. It's not paint, but yeah, so it's a sort of weird, I mean, I love the material. I feel I'm super comfortable working in that material. And not sort of comfortable in a sort of relaxed way. I mean, comfortable in that I feel like I can risk things because of my experience with the material, and having used it now for so long, it gives me, you know, the ability to risk more than I was able to before. So yeah, so that's a really exciting piece about working in clay for me.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that, but I wonder if you can go outside. Is that going to be possible? Is it still
that is entirely possible?
Outside? Because my follow-up, and maybe I'm trying to be mindful of time also, maybe this would be a good place to have some final thoughts. Is out here. So speaking to that idea of having enough mastery kind of your materials and your process and just of sculpture to take risks, the title of this piece is All My Favorite Singers Couldn't Sing. And I think there's, for me, there's a connection between that title and what you've just said, right? About being,
Yes.
Having enough knowledge and experience with your, with your medium, kind of with your materials to be able to risk it all. And
Yes.
would you like to talk about that at all?
Yes, I think that's, I think that is a great point, and that, the title of this piece has a lot of meanings, but I think that the sentiment, all my favorite singers couldn't sing, is sort of a comment on sort of virtuosity, right? And versus, being technically skilled versus being able to communicate something on a different level, emotionally, I don't know, just on a different plane. That it's not about, oh, look how good I am at doing this. It's about communicating an idea or a feeling or a gesture, or, it's the idea of it is independent of, well, not independent of, that's not right, but, it's not all about being virtuosic. I think. Yes, do you have?
I think that brings us full circle to where we started, and maybe that's a good place to end for now.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, and thank you all for watching.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.